Hi, my name is Davina Katulski, and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I have a telehealth practice, and I'm licensed in California, Oregon, and Washington. I also have a specialty working with LGBTQ plus people and their families around coming out issues and addressing the specific issues that come up with LGBTQ people because of the inequities and the social discrimination that LGBTQ people experience. Have you ever had any of these challenges as a therapist? Have you found that you don't know which words to use when speaking to an LGBTQ client? Or perhaps you're afraid you might offend your client by using the wrong language? Are you confused or overwhelmed by the alphabet of terms like LGBTIQ and not really sure or aren't clear on what they stand for? Perhaps you believe that LGBTQ people should work specifically with LGBTQ therapists as opposed to a non LGBTQ therapist. In this course, you're going to learn all the terminology that you need to know when working with LGBTQ people and what words to use and what words to steer clear of. Even well-meaning therapists can make mistakes. So having a caring, well-meaning therapist is important, but it's not enough. As many minority groups know, even a well-meaning therapist can make mistakes. And if they're not educated about the important issues that a minority group faces, those mistakes can be harmful and hurtful. It's extremely important that therapists not make assumptions and attribute every psychological issue to a minority group status, which are being LGBT, which means being LGBTQ in this situation. So you don't want to assume that every issue that the person is experiencing is related to their sexual minority LGBTQ status. It's equally important that therapists not underestimate the impact of being LGBTQ and gender non-binary, and to understand how that impacts a client's psychological experience in the world. Minimizing the impact of bullying or discrimination or oppression can equally hurt a client. It's important that a therapist be able to look at a situation a client is facing and be able to identify what the specific stressors an LGBT person is experiencing because of their minority status, and what things have nothing to do with their LGBTQ status and have to do with other psychological or other social stressors or developmental concerns, etc. It's important that that not be an exclusive focus of the therapy. So again, many LGBTQ people have experienced being stigmatized by their own therapist or misunderstood by their own therapist, assuming that the issues that they're facing are related to their being LGBTQ. And other times, the realities and the discrimination they've experienced have been minimized. So I hope that's sort of clear. Again, it's important that therapists understand each client's specific experiences. And there's a difference between getting to know a client and know their specific worldviews and experiences and using the client to glean information for the therapist to educate themselves. Again, you want to understand the distinction of that. So therapists need to educate themselves outside of the client hour about the needs of the populations they work with. Additionally, it was not uncommon in the past for heterosexual therapists or non-LGBTQ therapists to attribute pathology to the reason why a client would be LGBTQ, trans, non-binary. And the myth that clients are LGBTQ or non-binary because they've experienced a sexual trauma in childhood or because it's a fad or a social contagion, these are myths that continue to be perpetuated in some situations, and so they must be addressed as well. It's important that the clinician educate themselves about LGBTQ terminology and understand that it's constantly changing, and the reality LGBTQ and non-binary individuals face while being able to be completely present with the client in the specific issues that the client brings up in their sessions during the therapeutic hour with you. So that's what you're going to get with my course. In my course, you're going to learn to familiarize or refamiliarize yourself with the correct terminology, again, which is ever evolving. So, try to give yourself grace on that. You're also going to look at the current and socio-political issues that LGBTQ people and their families currently face, as well as the historical context that LGBTQ people have grown up in, which still impacts people, especially if you're working with older clients. They are still all of that experience of discrimination and what has gone on before is still living within their psychological field, and that's still something that exists and is being processed. So just because it's better in 2024 than it was in 1984 doesn't mean that if you're working with older clients that they're still processing and experiencing some of the internalized homophobia and the externalized homophobia, transphobia that existed in the culture at that time. So again, we're going to look at also the history of discrimination in the LGBT community with regard to the therapeutic community and how therapists and the psychological field, the health field, has impacted LGBT people as well. As you may know, it wasn't until 1973 that the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality as a DSM category. Additionally, it wasn't until 2003 that same-sex relations were no longer criminalized in the U.S. Up until 2003, when the Supreme Court ruled on the Lawrence v. Texas decision, before that, members of the same sex in a relationship could be thrown in prison, literally taken out of their home, which happened in the case of Lawrence v. Texas, for the expression of love or affection to a same-sex partner, and thrown into jail because at the time, same-sex affection and sexuality was considered a crime in several states. Again, that wasn't until 2003 when the Lawrence v. Texas decision struck down all remaining bans on same-sex sexuality. Also, in this course, you're going to learn about the unique stressors that LGBTQ people face and their families face, and how to support them as they move through that. You're going to learn about vulnerable members of the LGBTQ population, such as youth and seniors, and how to anticipate their specific mental health needs. You're also going to learn about the coming out stages and Vivian Cass's identity model. And in this course, I'm going to share with you the important do's and don'ts when talking to LGBTQ clients. For example, you do not want to make the assumption of the terminology that a client might use. You want to keep things open-ended and ask them what pronouns they use, how do they identify their sexual orientation, their gender identity, etc., and go from there. Again, you don't want to make any assumptions. So, for example, you may have a female client who is currently attracted to another woman. You wouldn't want to make the assumption that that client identifies as a lesbian. She may use the word gay. She may identify as bisexual. She may identify as pansexual or omnisexual or demisexual. She may identify as non-binary. She may identify as trans. She may identify as heterosexual and having a relationship with a woman. She may also identify as a straight man attracted to a woman. So again, you want to know from your client specifically how they identify, the terms they use, the pronouns that they prefer. You really want to know from the client, again, what their sexual orientation is, their gender orientation. And these things are separate and different. So you want to know their sexual orientation separate from their gender orientation. And again, people tend to confuse or link gender and sexual orientation as the same thing, and they're not. Some additional don'ts. You don't want to assume what someone's sexual orientation is or their gender identity simply based on their presentation. People may present one way, but that doesn't mean that that's how they identify. They may present that way because they haven't come out yet, or to feel safe in the world, or because of their job, they don't want to lose their family, etc. So you also don't want to assume that everyone is heterosexual. Again, when you're doing your intakes with a new client, asking more general questions such as, are you married? What does your spouse do? Or what does your husband or wife do? In your recent relationships, do you date men, women, both? Are you attracted to both women and men, or one or the other? Do you identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, demisexual, omnisexual? Do you identify as cisgendered or non-binary? What are your preferred pronouns, etc.? So, having an intake form that's very open-ended where clients can put things in, or including all of these words and this terminology in your intake, and telling them to circle as many as they relate to. This is going to give you much more information about how your client sees themselves and identifies. Now, many clients may feel intimidated sharing with you who they are. If you set the stage that you are open and you understand that heterosexuality is not the only sexuality, nor the superior sexuality, then clients are going to be more forthcoming with you and more likely to share their experiences. At the end of this course, you're going to know the stages of coming out and identity, the correct language to use when referring to or speaking with LGBTQ people, and you're going to have a better idea of the general psychological issues and social issues that your clients may be facing. And you're going to understand the history of discrimination that the LGBTQ population has faced. Even though there's not a linear genetic intergenerational transmission of trauma, each new group that comes out, Each new generation of LGBTQ people is still inheriting the past homophobia and heterosexism of the culture. There's still a lot of shifting going on. Again, we live in a much better time period. Being LGBTQ plus is no longer a mental health issue in this country. It's no longer a crime in the United States. However, there are still there's still people that believe that being LGBTQ plus is a sin, or at the very least, a birth defect, somehow inferior, and that heterosexuality and being cisgendered is normative and superior. So this course is really designed to familiarize yourself with issues LGBTQ plus people face and to be a therapist who is welcoming, who has a basic education on LGBTQI plus issues, and is going to be able to help their LGBTIQ plus clients. I hope you enjoy this course, and I want to thank you for taking it.